What if everything you thought you knew about your destiny was just the beginning? What if the ocean, that vast, terrifying, breathtaking expanse of water that stretches beyond anything the human eye can track, what if it had been calling you your whole life, not because you were special, but because the world itself was broken, and you were the only one stubborn enough, brave enough, and yes, reckless enough to try to fix it? That's the question sitting at the heart of Moana 2. And let me tell you something right now, before we dive into a single frame of this film. This movie does not play it safe. It does not give you the comfortable, familiar, paint-by-numbers sequel that most studios would have churned out after the runaway success of the original 2016 Moana. Instead, what Disney delivered in late 2024 is something grander, messier, more emotionally complex, and far more ambitious than anyone expected from a movie that, honestly, started its life as a streaming television series before Disney decided, midway through production, that this story deserved the big screen. And that origin story, that behind-the-scenes pivot from Disney Plus series to full theatrical release, it actually matters when you're analyzing what this film is and what it's trying to be. But we'll get to that. We've got a long road ahead of us today, and I promise you, every minute of it is worth your time. Because here's the thing about Moana 2 that nobody's really talking about loudly enough. Underneath all the stunning animation, underneath the banger musical numbers, underneath the gorgeous Pacific Island mythology that Disney paints across the screen in vivid, jaw-dropping color, there is a deeply human story about the weight of legacy, the cost of leadership, and what it means to answer a call that might get you killed. So pour yourself something, get comfortable, and let's break this thing wide open. This is Moana 2, the complete story breakdown, character deep dive, thematic analysis, and full critical review. Let's go. Part 2, Movie Overview. What is Moana 2? Before we get into the story itself, let's set the stage, because context is everything with a film like this. Moana 2 was released theatrically on November 27, 2024, Thanksgiving weekend in the United States, which, if you know anything about the Hollywood box office calendar, is one of the most coveted release windows of the entire year. Studios don't put their big swings there unless they have massive confidence in what they're releasing. Disney was making a statement. The film was directed by Dave Derrick Jr., Jason Hand, and Dana LaDue Miller, with LaDue Miller also serving as a writer on the project. This was a significant shift from the original film, which was directed by Ron Clements and John Musker, two Disney legends responsible for The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and Treasure Planet. The creative team behind Moana 2 was newer, hungrier, and in many ways, more personally connected to the Polynesian cultural heritage at the center of the story. Auli'i Cravalho returns to voice Moana, and let me just say up front, she is extraordinary in this film. Her vocal performance has matured in exactly the way you'd hope. There's a depth, a weight, a weariness in her voice now that the teenage Moana of the first film simply couldn't have had. She sounds like someone who has been carrying the world on her shoulders for a few years and is learning, painfully, that carrying the world alone was never the point. Dwayne Johnson also returns as the demigod Maui, and his role in this film is different, more complicated, more emotionally loaded. We'll get into that. The film also introduces a brand new ensemble cast of characters, which is one of the biggest structural departures from the original. Where the first Moana was essentially a two-hander, Moana and Maui, girl and demigod, human and legend, Moana 2 is a full ensemble adventure. We get a crew. We get a team. We get personalities bouncing off each other across 300 miles of open ocean, and the film lives or dies on whether you care about all of them. Spoiler, you will. Eventually. Some of them take a minute. Musically, the film features new songs from a team that includes Abigail Barlow and Emily Bear, who first gained viral fame for their unofficial Bridgerton musical on TikTok before being tapped for more serious work. The presence of newer musical voices, rather than the original songwriting team of Lin-Manuel Miranda alongside Opataya Foai and Mark Mancina, was a point of some anxiety for fans going in. We'll talk about how that worked out. Genre-wise, Moana 2 is an animated fantasy adventure with heavy musical elements, deeply rooted in Polynesian mythology, specifically drawing on concepts, legends, and cultural traditions from across the Pacific Island world, including Hawaiian, Samoan, Tahitian, and Fijian influences, all brought into the production in deep consultation with the Oceanic Story Trust, a group of cultural advisors who work with Disney to ensure authentic representation. Audience expectations going into this film were complicated. On one hand, the original Moana is one of Disney's most beloved animated films of the modern era. How Far I'll Go is a genuine cultural landmark. The animation, the story, the heart, all of it landed. So expectations were sky high. On the other hand, the news that this started as a TV series made some people nervous. Would it feel episodic? Would it feel padded? Would it feel like a movie, or like several episodes of television awkwardly stitched together? These were legitimate concerns. And addressing them honestly is part of the job we're doing today. Now let's get into the story. Part 3, the full story breakdown, scene by scene. Chapter 1, Motunui after the legend. The film opens not with chaos or spectacle, but with something quieter and more interesting. Familiarity disrupted. We're back on Motunui, the lush, vibrant island we fell in love with in 2016. The coconut trees sway. The ocean shimmers. Children play on the shore. And for just a moment, you think, okay, we're home. Everything is fine. Everything is safe. And then you notice something. The faces of the villagers aren't quite at ease. There's a tension humming on. Center of that restlessness, not quite knowing what to do with herself, is Moana. She's older now. A few years have passed since the events of the first film. She helped restore the heart of Te Fiti, she sailed beyond the reef, she proved that the people of Motunui were voyagers, explorers, and not just people meant to stay within the safety of their shores. She did all of that. She changed everything. And now she's home. And the ocean is still calling. This is such a smart, emotionally honest place to start the sequel. Because the question it's really asking right at the top is, what does a hero do after the quest is over? What happens when the thing that gave you purpose has been accomplished, and the world keeps spinning, and people expect you to just settle back into normal life? Moana is the chief in training of her island. She has responsibilities. She has family. She has a community that needs her. But the ocean doesn't care about any of that. We learn in these opening scenes, through a combination of visual storytelling and dialogue, that Moana has been leading voyages to neighboring islands, working to rebuild the ancient network of Polynesian wayfinding and community. She's doing good work. Real work. Important work. But something is wrong. The skies have been darkening far out at sea. Strange weather patterns. Unnatural storms. And Moana's grandmother, Gramatala, who appears to Moana in the form of a manta ray spirit, one of the most beautiful recurring visual motifs in this entire franchise, comes to her with a warning. There is a place called Motafetu. Say that name slowly, because it's going to matter for the next 2 hours. Motafetu is described as a legendary island, an ancient meeting place of civilizations, a hub from which all the great Pacific voyaging cultures once radiated outward like spokes on a wheel. It was the original point of connection between all the peoples of the Pacific, a place where different islands and different peoples could find each other, share knowledge, share culture, share life. And then it was buried. Not metaphorically. Literally. A god, an ancient, powerful, deeply dangerous god named Nalo, sank Motafetu beneath the waves thousands of years ago. And with it, he severed the connections between all those civilizations. Isolated them. Trapped them. Nalo is a god of storms and separation, and his power is the power of distance, of keeping people apart, of making the ocean a barrier rather than a road. And now, something, the ocean, the spirits, the world itself, is calling for Motafetu to rise again. For those connections to be restored. And the only way that can happen is if someone journeys to where Motafetu lies beneath the waves and unlocks it. That someone, of course, is Moana. But, and this is where the film immediately starts differentiating itself from the original, Moana is told, in no uncertain terms, that she cannot do this alone. The journey is too far. The dangers are too great. And the magic that's required to unlock Motafetu. It requires a crew. A real crew. Not just a girl and a demigod and a rooster. So she needs a team. Chapter 2: Assembling the Crew. The crew recruitment sequence is one of the most purely fun sections of the film, and it showcases immediately the ensemble dynamic that's going to carry the story forward. First, we meet Loto, an intensely passionate, borderline manic young woman who is obsessed with boat technology and engineering. She's been building experimental canoes and wayfinding equipment in her own little workshop, and when Moana comes looking for the best sailor engineer on the island, Loto doesn't just raise her hand, she literally launches herself out of a window in excitement. Loto is played with infectious, chaotic energy, and she's designed as a kind of counterbalance to Moana's more grounded, measured leadership style. Where Moana is deliberate, Loto is impulsive. Where Moana thinks 3 moves ahead, Loto is already halfway through move 7 and has broken something. She's hilarious. She's endearing. And she actually serves a really important narrative function beyond comic relief, which the film earns gradually. Then there's Kele, the food-obsessed, anxiety-ridden provisioner who is responsible for making sure the crew doesn't starve on the open ocean. Kele is neurotic in the best possible way. He's the person on every dangerous expedition who everyone makes fun of for over-preparing, and then everyone is extremely grateful for when things go sideways. He's not a warrior. He's not a navigator. He's a guy who knows how to stretch a coconut supply for 3 weeks longer than anyone thought possible, and in the context of open ocean sailing, that is invaluable. His arc in the film is quiet but meaningful, about learning to trust that your contribution matters even when it isn't dramatic. Then there's Moni, who might be the film's most interesting new character from a pure narrative standpoint. Moni is a young man with a deep, almost spiritual devotion to Maui. Like full-on superfan. He has Maui tattoos. He knows Maui's entire mythology by heart. He sings Maui's praises in a way that's meant to be funny but also functions as a fascinating mirror, because Maui himself, when he eventually appears in this film, is not the legend that Moni has built up in his head. Moni's arc is about the gap between the stories we tell about our heroes and the complicated, flawed, still magnificent reality of those heroes. It's actually kind of profound for a Disney animated film, and it's executed with real grace. And then there is Moana's younger sister, who appears briefly in the opening sections and represents the pull of home, of family, of what Moana is leaving behind every time she sails away. The sister dynamic adds an emotional layer to Moana's departure that the original film didn't have. In the first film, Moana was leaving to save the world. Here, she's leaving a world that's already been saved, which makes the goodbye feel different, heavier, more complicated. Once the crew is assembled, there's a beautiful departure sequence. The people of Motunui gather on the shore. Moana's father, the chief, struggles visibly with letting his daughter sail into danger again. Her mother holds herself together with that particular dignity that parents of brave children learn out of necessity. And Moana stands on the prow of her canoe, eyes on the horizon, and the ocean rises to meet her. It's gorgeous. And it's the last moment of peace the film offers for quite a while. Chapter 3: The Ocean as Antagonist. Here is where Moana 2 starts to establish what kind of film it wants to be, and it's braver than you might expect. The ocean in Moana 2 is not the friendly, playful, almost childlike character it was in the original film. Yes, there are moments of connection. Yes, the ocean is still on Moana's side in some fundamental, cosmic sense. But out here, far from Motunui, far from anything familiar, the ocean is vast and indifferent in a way that the first film didn't quite capture. There's a sequence early in the voyage where the crew hits weather. Not Nala-created supernatural weather, just regular, brutal, open ocean weather. Massive swells. Blinding rain. Winds that don't care how important your quest is. And watching Moana try to navigate this, try to hold her crew together, try to keep the canoe on course, try to project confidence she's not sure she entirely feels. It's one of the most viscerally compelling sequences in the film. Because here's what the film is doing in these early ocean scenes: it's establishing stakes through reality. Before we get to the mythological, supernatural dangers of Nalo and sunken islands and ancient curses, we have to understand that the ocean itself is dangerous. That the voyage is actually hard. That these are real human beings in wooden boats on water that does not care whether they live or die. The technical animation in these scenes is staggering. The water simulation, the way the waves move, the way light refracts through the spray, the way the canoe rides and pitches and groans against the pressure of the swells, is some of the most technically accomplished water animation that has ever appeared in a theatrical release. And I'm including Pixar in that comparison. This is extraordinary work. During one particularly brutal storm sequence, we get the first suggestion that Nalo is aware of Moana. That the god of storms and separation knows someone is coming to undo his ancient work. The storm doesn't feel random. It feels targeted. And that shift, from natural danger to supernatural opposition, is handled with real atmospheric skill. The crew begins to fracture slightly under pressure. Not in a dramatic, soap opera way, but in the quiet, realistic way that people fray when they're scared and tired and a long way from home. Loto argues with Moana about navigation. Kele's anxiety spikes. Moni starts to question whether he made the right decision coming. And Moana, our hero, has to somehow hold all of this together while also being privately terrified herself. It's in these moments that Auli'i Cravalho's vocal performance really shines. There's a scene, not a song, just a scene, where Moana is alone at the prow of the boat at night, her hand trailing in the water, and she whispers, almost to herself, "I hear you. I just don't know if I'm enough yet." It's a small moment. It's not highlighted with swelling music or dramatic lighting. And it might be the most emotionally true moment in the entire film. Chapter 4: The First Island, and the First Real Danger. The crew makes landfall on a strange island, not Motafetu, but one of many islands that Nalo has touched over the centuries. An island that feels wrong in a way that's hard to articulate at first. It looks beautiful from a distance. Rich vegetation, clear waters, dramatic rock formations. But as the crew explores, things become increasingly unsettling. The island is inhabited by creatures that seem to exist slightly outside the normal rules of nature, animals that move strangely, plants that grow in patterns that feel almost intentional, like the island itself is watching them. And then they find the ruins. Ancient structures. Stone platforms, carved monoliths, navigational markers that date back thousands of years. Remnants of a civilization that once thrived here and then, suddenly, completely, stopped. Like someone turned off a switch. Like the people just disappeared. This is one of Nalo's islands. An island where he severed the connections so completely that the people living there lost their ability to navigate, lost their knowledge of the stars and the currents, and eventually lost themselves entirely. They became unable to leave. Unable to reach out. Unable to remember who they were. It's harrowing. And it's the first concrete, visual demonstration of what Nalo's power actually does to communities. He doesn't destroy them with fire and floods. He isolates them. He makes them forget that connection is possible. And then he watches them fade. The thematic weight of this, in a movie being watched in 2024 America, in a world that has spent the last several years reckoning with what isolation does to people, to communities, to mental health, is not subtle. But it's not meant to be subtle. Disney is making a point, and they're making it through the most ancient and universal storytelling language they have, myth. Moana finds something in the ruins. A navigational star chart, carved in stone, that points toward Motafetu. But it's damaged. Partially destroyed. And deciphering it requires knowledge that none of the crew has. Except, maybe, a certain demigod. If they can find him. Chapter 5: Maui, where is the demigod now? Finding Maui is not as simple as it was in the original film. He's not trapped on an island somewhere. He's not stationary. Maui is complicated now. The way the film handles Maui's reintroduction is genuinely clever. You hear about him before you see him. Stories from island to island, some reverent, some skeptical, some outright negative. There are people in this Pacific world who don't love Maui. There are communities he let down. Islands he forgot. Promises he made and didn't keep, because he was off doing something more dramatic and legendary. And that reputation, that complicated, mixed legacy, is what Moni has to confront when he finally comes face to face with his idol. When we do see Maui, Dwayne Johnson brings something to the performance that he held back in the original. A weariness, a guardedness. Maui in the first film was ego and bluster with vulnerability underneath. Maui in the second film is someone who has been thinking, for a few years, about the difference between the legend he built for himself and the actual good he's done in the world. He's been doing smaller things. More personal things. And not for the recognition. The reunion between Moana and Maui is warm but not uncomplicated. There's affection, genuine, deep affection between these two, but there's also unspoken tension. Because Maui knows what this quest is. And he knows what it's going to cost. His return to the crew comes with conditions and complications that I won't spoil entirely, but what I will say is that his arc in this film is the most emotionally sophisticated thing Dwayne Johnson has ever done in a voice performance. He reaches places in this role that are genuinely moving, and there's a scene in the film's second half, between Maui and Moana, that is one of the great animated dramatic scenes of the decade. We'll get to it. Chapter 6, The Storm God, Nalo revealed. The first full confrontation with Nalo comes at roughly the film's midpoint, and it's a remarkable piece of animated filmmaking. Nalo doesn't look like you expect a god to look. He doesn't arrive in human form, throwing thunderbolts and delivering monologues. He arrives as weather. He arrives as the sky turning a color it shouldn't be, a deep, bruised purple-green that the characters recognize instinctively as wrong. He arrives as a sound beneath the sound, a subsonic rumble that you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. And then the storm wall appears on the horizon. Not moving toward them. Just there. A wall of solid darkness stretching from the water to the clouds, alive with lightning, humming with ancient power. It's one of the most visually terrifying things Disney animation has produced. And what makes it work, what makes it actually frightening rather than just spectacular, is the reaction of the crew. Because these are experienced sailors. These are people who have weathered storms before. And they are afraid in a way that goes deeper than ordinary fear. They're afraid the way you're afraid when you understand, on some instinctual level, that you are dealing with something that operates entirely outside the rules you've been taught. The confrontation itself involves Maui trying to fight, because of course it does, that's what Maui does, and discovering that his hook, his legendary fish hook that channels his demigod power, is essentially useless against Nalo. You can't fight weather with a hook. You can't punch a storm into submission. And watching Maui come to this realization, watching the invincible demigod discover the limits of his invincibility, is devastating in exactly the way the film intends it to be. The crew escapes, barely. Not through power, but through Moana's navigation, through her reading of the ocean, her understanding of the currents beneath the storm, her willingness to sail through the fear rather than away from it. It's a beautiful articulation of the film's central thesis: the answer to a force of separation is connection. The answer to isolation is movement toward each other. Chapter 7, The World Beneath the Waves. In the film's extraordinary second half, Moana dives, literally dives, beneath the ocean's surface to access the ancient pathways that will lead her to Motafetu. The underwater sequences in this film there are no adequate words. The animation team clearly spent enormous creative energy on what the world beneath the Pacific looks like when filtered through Polynesian mythology. It's not just ocean, it's memory. It's history. The water itself is layered with the remnants of ancient voyages, ghost ships, ghost currents, the trails of civilizations that once moved across this water with confidence and purpose. There are creatures down here that exist in the liminal space between the natural world and the spiritual one. Ancient beings that are part fish, part memory, part god. Some are curious. Some are hostile. Some barely notice Moana at all, because she's so small against the vast antiquity of what they represent. There's a sequence here, a navigational puzzle that Moana has to solve using the fragments of star chart from the ruined island, combined with the ocean's own memories, that is simultaneously the film's most intellectually interesting set piece and its most visually dazzling. It's essentially a three-dimensional wayfinding challenge, where Moana has to read the currents and the stars and the echoes of ancient navigation to chart a course to something that has been hidden for 1,000 years. And the film commits fully to the idea that Moana is extraordinarily smart. Not just brave. Not just determined. Smart. She's a master navigator. She understands these systems in a way that even Maui, with all his supernatural knowledge, doesn't entirely grasp. And watching her work, watching her problem solve in real time, adapting as the puzzle changes, trusting her instincts when the data runs out, is genuinely exciting in a way that animation doesn't always achieve with intellectual challenges. Chapter 8, The Dark Night of the Soul. Every great hero story has a dark night of the soul. A moment when everything seems lost. When the hero is stripped of the things they rely on, their abilities, their confidence, their support system, and has to find out what they're made of at the absolute bottom. Moana 2's Dark Night comes when the crew is separated. A storm, Nalo, again, always Nalo, scatters the canoe. People are in the water. The boat is damaged. And for a terrible few minutes, Moana is alone in the ocean with no idea where her crew is. It's a brief sequence, by running time. But emotionally, it's the heaviest thing the film asks you to carry. Because in these moments, in the darkness, in the water, in the not knowing, Moana finally, completely breaks down. And it's good. It's important that she breaks down. Because this is a film about the cost of leadership, and part of that cost is the intolerable weight of feeling responsible for other people's safety. Moana chose these people. She asked them to come on this journey. And if something has happened to them because of a choice she made, that is something she will carry for the rest of her life. The ocean responds. Not with easy comfort, not with the playful, almost paternalistic reassurance of the first film's ocean spirit. The ocean responds with something more complex. More like acknowledgement. Yes, this is hard. Yes, this is real. Yes, you are frightened. And yes, I am still here. But you have to move. The crew is found. Damaged but alive. The boat can be repaired. Loto, of course, is already on it before anyone asks. And something has shifted in Moana. Something has clarified. She's not sailing to Motafetu because the ocean told her to. She's not sailing there because it's her destiny. She's sailing there because she has looked at the evidence of what Nalo's isolation has done to people, to whole civilizations, and she has decided, with the full weight of her conscious, adult self, that this is worth dying for. That's the difference between a chosen hero and a self-determined hero. And Moana 2 is, at its heart, the story of Moana making that choice for herself. Chapter 9, Motafetu, The Moment of Arrival. The arrival at Motafetu, or rather, at the place where Motafetu lies beneath the waves, is the film's most visually spectacular sequence and also its most emotionally overwhelming. The surface of the water here is different. Calmer, despite everything Nalo has thrown at them. As if the water above the buried island recognizes that something important is happening. The crew gathers at the prow of the repaired canoe and looks down, and through the clear Pacific water, impossibly far below, they can see lights. Ancient, impossible lights. The lights of a civilization that has been waiting, underneath everything, for someone to come. Moana dives. And what she finds at the bottom of the ocean is something the film has been building toward across its entire runtime, a place of perfect, terrible stillness. Motafetu is preserved. It hasn't rotted or decayed in the way of ordinary sunken things. Nalo's magic has kept it frozen in the moment of its sinking, a snapshot of a civilization at its peak, held in place for 1,000 years, waiting. The streets are empty. The buildings stand perfect. The navigational charts on the walls of ancient temples are intact. And at the center of it all, there is a mechanism, ancient Polynesian architecture merged with something that feels almost divine, a locking mechanism that holds Motafetu on the ocean floor. And above it, not in the form of a storm now but in something approaching physical form, the crackling, terrible, barely contained shape of Nalo. The final confrontation is not a fight in the conventional sense. You can't fight a god of storms and separation by hitting things harder. The answer, the key to unlocking Motafetu and defeating Nalo, requires something that Nalo fundamentally cannot conceive of. It requires the crew acting together. It requires each person using the thing they're best at, Loto's engineering, Kele's knowledge, Moni's unexpected depth of cultural knowledge, Maui's power channeled in a new direction, in perfect coordination. It requires connection. Literal, physical, intentional connection between people who trust each other. Because Nalo's fundamental weakness, his blind spot, the thing that a god of isolation and separation literally cannot compute, is genuine community. Real trust. People choosing each other. And when Moana makes the final move, not alone, not as the chosen hero descending from destiny, but as the center of a network of people who have chosen her as she has chosen them, the mechanism unlocks. Motafetu rises. Chapter 10, The Rising, and the Cost. The Rising of Motafetu is the film's climactic set piece, and it is extraordinary. The water churns. The ocean pulls back from the island as it ascends. Ancient stone buildings break the surface, streaming waterfalls from every ledge and rooftop, glistening in light that feels almost sacred. And the people of the surrounding islands, who have been drawn to this place by currents and instinct and whatever it is that calls peoples back to their shared histories, they arrive. Canoes from a dozen different island cultures, converging on this place that used to be the center of their shared world. It's visually overwhelming in the way that only the best animated film can achieve. Because animation, freed from the constraints of physical reality, can do things with scale and beauty that live action simply cannot. And the animators here earn every frame of this sequence. But the film doesn't let it be purely triumphant. Because Nalo is not simply defeated. He is diminished, driven back, stripped of the power that the sunken island gave him. But he is not gone. He still exists, out there in the storms that separate islands, in the distances that make connection hard. He will always exist. Separation is not evil, sometimes distance is just distance. But the malicious separation, the kind that turns distance into prison? That, the film suggests, can be fought. Has to be fought. One voyage at a time. And there is a cost to the victory. I'm being deliberately vague here because I genuinely believe some things are better experienced than described. But there is a sacrifice in this film that will hit you harder than you expect, and it's handled with more grace and emotional intelligence than I thought a Thanksgiving Disney animated film was prepared to deliver. Part 4, Character and Performance Analysis. Moana, the burden of the sequel hero. Auli'i Cravalho's performance in Moana 2 is the best vocal performance in any animated Disney film since Philippa Sue in Raya and the Last Dragon. That's a big statement. Let me defend it. In the first film, Moana's journey was about discovering who she was, finding the courage to honor the call of the ocean against the wishes of her community and her own fears. It's a beautiful, classic coming-of-age story, and Cravalho played it perfectly, with wonder, with spirit, with a voice that could carry both comedy and heartbreak. In Moana 2, Moana is no longer discovering herself. She knows herself, or thinks she does. And what the film does, brilliantly, is use that self-knowledge as the source of her vulnerability rather than her strength. Moana knows she's the wayfinder. She knows she's the one the ocean calls. And that knowledge has become a kind of armor that she wears, and underneath the armor, she's terrified that she's been carrying the world alone for so long that she's forgotten how to let anyone else carry it with her. Cravalho voices this not through dramatic declarations but through texture. Through hesitations. Through the slight tightening in the voice when Moana is asked a question she doesn't have the answer to. It's incredibly nuanced work for any medium. In animation, where the voice has to do everything, it's exceptional. Maui, the mythology behind the mythology. Dwayne Johnson has always been charming in this role. The first film played to his strengths: big personality, physical comedy, magnetic screen presence, unexpected emotional vulnerability. Moana 2 asks him to go somewhere he hasn't been, which is genuine reckoning. Maui has spent millennia crafting a mythology around himself, and in this film he's forced to confront the gap between that mythology and his actual impact on the world. Are the stories true? Some of them. But some of them are. embellished. Some islands he helped exist, and some islands he meant to help and never got around to. And the people on those islands who built shrines to him and waited for him and needed him, they're still there. There's a scene where Maui is confronted by the descendants of people he failed. And Johnson plays it with a quietness, a stillness, that I genuinely didn't know he had in him. He doesn't try to charm his way out of it. He doesn't perform remorse. He just absorbs it. Like a man who has been running from a truth for a very long time and has finally stopped running. It's the best dramatic work of Dwayne Johnson's career. I realize that's not a high bar in some critics' eyes, but I mean it without qualification. Loto, the chaos that holds things together. Loto is the film's comic engine, but she's more than comic relief. Her obsession with engineering and technology, in a culture where technology means reading the stars and shaping wood and understanding the physics of wind and water, is played as genuine passion, not eccentricity. She loves what she does. She loves it with her whole self. And in a film about the value of bringing different kinds of people together, Loto is the reminder that not everyone who matters is a warrior or a navigator. Sometimes what you need is a person who can fix the boat. Moni, the fan who meets his hero. Moni's arc is the film's most unexpectedly resonant character journey, and I say that having come in expecting to find him annoying. The superfan character is well-worn territory. The person who idolizes a legend and then has to reconcile the legend with the reality. It's been done a lot. But what makes Moni work is that the film refuses to let the lesson be cynical. Moni meets Maui. Maui is flawed, complicated, not the golden legend of the stories. And Moni's love for the legend, for what Maui represents, for the idea of someone who changed the world through sheer unstoppable will, doesn't diminish when confronted with the complicated reality of the actual person. It transforms. It matures. And in the end, Moni's devotion to Maui's potential rather than his mythology is one of the things that helps Maui become more of what the legend always promised he could be. That's beautiful character writing. And whoever in the writer's room fought for Moni's arc to go that direction deserves recognition. Kele, the unsung hero. Kele gets the least screen time of the crew and the simplest arc, but what he represents is important. He represents the people who support great things from the sidelines. The people whose contributions don't make for great stories but without whom the great stories don't happen. The film doesn't frame this in a way that feels like a consolation prize. It frames it as genuinely noble. Genuinely necessary. In a world where we tend to celebrate the dramatic gesture and overlook the quiet consistency, Kele is a reminder that someone has to keep everyone fed. Part 5, Themes, Symbolism and Subtext. The ocean as metaphor. The ocean in Moana 2 operates on at least 3 levels simultaneously, which is one of the reasons the film rewards multiple viewings. On the literal level, it's the Pacific Ocean. A physical space that the characters are navigating. On the metaphorical level, it's the space between people. The distance, physical, emotional, cultural, that separates human beings from each other. Nalo's power is the malicious version of this distance, the distance that becomes isolation, that becomes forgetting. On the mythological level, it's the collective unconscious of an entire civilization. The ocean remembers the voyages that have been made across it. It carries the memory of connection even when the people on its surface have forgotten. And Moana's ability to communicate with the ocean, to hear it, to read it, to respond to it, is framed not as magic, but as a kind of cultural memory, a deep inheritance. This is sophisticated thematic territory for a Disney animated film, and the fact that it's grounded in actual Polynesian philosophy and cosmology, in real cultural traditions about the relationship between island peoples and the ocean, gives it an authenticity that elevates it beyond allegory. Nalo, isolation as the real villain. Nalo is one of Disney's most interesting animated villains precisely because he doesn't want anything that makes psychological sense as a personal ambition. He's not trying to take over. He's not trying to steal power for himself. He's not acting out of wounded pride or jealousy. He simply believes that separation is the natural and correct state of the world. That communities are stronger, or at least safer, when they don't reach out to each other. That the vulnerability of connection is too high a price for the benefits it provides. This ideology, and it is an ideology, the film makes that clear, is presented with enough nuance that you can almost understand it. There are real communities, real people, who have been hurt by contact with the outside world. Colonization. Exploitation. The violence that sometimes travels along the same routes as trade and cultural exchange. Nalo's position is not without historical precedent. But the film's answer to this nuance is not to pretend it doesn't exist. It's to argue that the alternative, deliberate isolation, the severing of connection, the forgetting of shared humanity, is worse. Not because connection is always safe, but because isolation is always death. In the end. Communities that cannot reach out to each other eventually collapse inward. In 2024, in a world of increasing nationalism, of closing borders, of digital bubbles that create profound social isolation even as we've never been more technologically connected, this theme lands with more weight than it might have in an earlier era. Legacy and the stories we tell. Running through the entire film is a meditation on legacy. On the stories civilizations tell about themselves and about their heroes. Maui's mythology is the most explicit example, the gap between the stories Moni has memorized and the complicated reality of the actual demigod. But it extends further. Motunui tells a story about itself as a voyaging people. That story was nearly lost, nearly became mythology rather than reality, by the time the first film takes place. Moana restored it. And now, in Moana 2, she's working to restore a larger story, the story of all the Pacific Island peoples as a connected, interconnected, interdependent civilization. Stories, the film argues, are not just entertainment. They are how communities remember who they are. They are how knowledge travels across time and distance. They are how the dead teach the living. And when stories are lost, when Nalo severs the connections that allow stories to travel, what dies is not just information. What dies is identity. Water and transformation. Throughout Polynesian mythology, water is the element of transformation. The ocean is not a barrier, it's a road. The act of diving beneath the surface, as Moana does multiple times in this film, is an act of going deeper than the surface level of reality, into the places where truth is stored. Every time Moana dives in this film, she comes back changed. The film uses this physical act as a visual metaphor for the psychological journey of the character, going beneath the surface of who she thinks she is, into the depths where her fears and her true motivations live, and coming back up transformed. It's the oldest mythological structure in the world, the descent and return, the catabasis, the hero who goes into the underworld and comes back having learned something that the living world could not have taught them. And the fact that Disney has embedded this ancient structure in a story rooted in actual Pacific Island cultural traditions rather than transplanting Greek or European mythology as they so often do, it feels significant. It feels earned. Part 6, Technical and Artistic Review. Animation, the state of the art. Let's be unambiguous about this, Moana 2 is the most technically accomplished piece of water animation ever produced for a theatrical release. The original Moana set a new benchmark for ocean animation in 2016. 8 years later, the team has cleared that benchmark by a margin that is genuinely staggering. The water doesn't just look real. It feels real. There is texture and weight and movement to every wave, every droplet, every underwater current that operates according to physical laws even when the context is supernatural. The deep water sequences, Moana exploring the ruins of Motufetu, the ghost light world beneath the Pacific, are particularly extraordinary. The way light behaves at depth, the way color drains from warm to cold as you descend, the way pressure manifests visually in the distortion of distant objects, all of it is captured with a fidelity that goes beyond technical achievement and becomes something approaching art. Character animation is equally strong. The new characters, Loto, Kele, Moni, feel physically distinct and internally consistent. They move in ways that reflect their personalities. Loto moves with the barely contained kinetic energy of someone who is always about to do something. Kele moves carefully, measuring each step, managing risk. Moni moves with the earnest, open book quality of someone who has not yet learned to protect himself from his own feelings. Moana herself has been updated subtly. She's a bit taller. Her posture carries more weight. The animation team has done something subtle and smart with her eyes. There's more going on behind them. More calculation. More grief. She is carrying more than the girl we first met, and you see it in her body before the dialogue tells you. Music, the new songs. The music is the film's most contested element, and I want to address it honestly. The absence of Lin-Manuel Miranda is felt. His work on the original Moana, collaborating with the Samoan composer Auli'i Cravalho, produced songs that were not just catchy but culturally rooted in a way that gave them genuine weight. How Far I'll Go is a masterpiece of the form. Shiny is one of Disney's funniest villain songs. The original soundtrack is exceptional. Barlow and Bear bring different strengths. They come from a different musical tradition, more contemporary pop, more influenced by musical theatre of the 2010s and 2020s. And what they produced for Moana 2 is, in its best moments, genuinely excellent. The film's central song, which I'll decline to spoil, is a legitimate contender for Disney's best animated film song in years. It's not How Far I'll Go. But very few songs are. There are weaker numbers. A comedic song in the early ensemble sections that doesn't quite land with the precision it needs to. A mid-film ballad that is beautiful but doesn't entirely justify its placement in the emotional arc. These are real criticisms. But the good outweighs the bad, and the score, the non-vocal musical accompaniment, is consistently excellent, drawing on the same Polynesian musical traditions as the first film while expanding the palette. Direction, 3 voices, 1 vision. Directing an animated film is always a collaborative effort, but having 3 directors on a project raises legitimate questions about coherence. Moana 2 is, on the whole, impressively unified. There are moments, particularly in the early ensemble comedy sequences, where you can feel slightly different sensibilities pulling in different directions. But the film finds its singular voice in its second half, and once it locks in, it doesn't let go. Dave Derrick Jr., Jason Hand, and Dana Ledoux-Miller all bring clearly personal investments to the material. Ledoux-Miller's background in Pacific Island cultural storytelling gives the mythological elements a gravity and specificity that elevates the film above most animated fantasy. The decision-making around when to use humor and when to commit to real emotional weight is judicious. These directors trusted the audience to handle complexity. Sound design. The sound design of Moana 2 is a masterclass in using audio to build emotional reality. The underwater sequences are the standout, the way the sound muffles and shifts when Moana dives, the particular silence of the deep ocean, the way Nalo's presence is telegraphed through infrasonic rumble before any visual cue. All of it is carefully, intentionally constructed. The silence is as important as the sound. There is a moment of near total silence in the film's climax that lasts approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds. In a movie theater, 4 seconds of silence after an hour and 50 minutes of music and waves and character interaction is an eternity. And it is deployed with extraordinary precision, landing at exactly the moment when the audience needs to feel the full weight of what has just happened before the sound, and the emotion, crashes back in. Part 7, Critical Review and Comparisons. The Strengths. The emotional core of Moana 2 is stronger than most critics acknowledged in initial reviews. The film was sometimes dismissed as good enough, a serviceable sequel that coasted on the goodwill of the original. I think this assessment is wrong. Not because the film is perfect, it isn't, but because its thematic ambition and emotional depth are real, and dismissing them because the packaging is animated Disney's sequel misses what's actually happening on screen. The character work is the strongest argument for the film's success. Moana herself is a more interesting, more complex character in this film than in the first one, and that is a genuine achievement. Most sequels sand down their heroes. Moana 2 had slayers. The animation is unambiguously the best thing Disney animation has produced in the modern era. Even if you find the story weak, and I don't, but even if you did, you cannot dismiss the visual achievement. The cultural authenticity remains exemplary. The involvement of the Oceanic Story Trust, the commitment to rooting the mythology in actual Pacific Island tradition rather than generalized exotic island aesthetics, continues to set this franchise apart from the majority of Disney animated films and frankly from most Hollywood representations of Pacific Island cultures. The weaknesses. The ensemble structure, while thematically appropriate, does create pacing issues in the film's first act. Introducing 4 significant new characters while also advancing a complex mythological plot is a lot to ask of an audience in the first 40 minutes, and there are places where the film doesn't quite manage it without a degree of exposition that feels rushed. The villain, for all his conceptual interest, is underdeveloped in terms of screen presence. Nalo is more effective as an idea than as a character. He operates mostly as a force of nature rather than a fully realized antagonist, and while this is philosophically consistent, isolation doesn't have a face, separation doesn't deliver speeches, it does mean that the final confrontation lacks the personal, emotional stakes of the best Disney villain endings. And yes, some of the new songs are weaker than the original film's catalog. This is real. It's not a deal breaker. But it's true. Comparisons. The most obvious comparison is to the original Moana, and by almost every measure, the sequel is a more ambitious film. Whether it's a better film is genuinely a matter of taste. The original has the advantage of simplicity, a 2-character story with a clear, elegant arc. The sequel's ambition creates both its greatest strengths and its most visible weaknesses. Compare it to other Disney sequels, and it fares significantly better than most. It is miles ahead of Frozen 2 in terms of narrative coherence and emotional payoff, though Frozen 2's music is somewhat stronger. It is comparable to, though different from, the ambitions of Ralph Breaks the Internet. Both films are grappling with what it means to be a sequel in the Disney animated tradition, and both films are more interesting when they're failing interestingly than most animated sequels are when they're succeeding safely. The comparison that surprised me is to Pixar's Coco. Not thematically, the films are doing different things, but tonally. Both films are willing to go to places of genuine grief and genuine loss in service of emotional truth. Both films trust children and families to handle complexity. Both films use cultural specificity not as decoration but as the actual foundation of their stories. Moana 2, like Coco, is a film that respects the intelligence of its audience regardless of age. And that is worth something. Part 8, Final Verdict and Ending. What the ending really means. I want to talk about the ending without giving away the sacrifice I mentioned earlier, because I believe it should be experienced. But I want to talk about what the last image of Moana 2 means, because I think it's been somewhat underanalyzed. The film ends not on Moana standing triumphant. Not on Moana arriving home to celebration. The film ends on something smaller and more profound, a shot of the ocean. Just the ocean. The waves moving in their ancient rhythm. And then, beneath the surface, briefly, a light. Not supernatural. Not dramatic. Just a light that suggests something is still there. Still alive. Still connected. It's a reminder that Motufetu has risen but the world hasn't been fixed. The connections restored are not permanent guarantees. Nalo still exists in the storms that separate people. The work of connection, of reaching across distance, of choosing to sail toward rather than away, that work is never finished. And that is not a pessimistic ending. It's a realistic one. And in its realism, it's actually more hopeful than a triumphant, everything is solved finale would have been. Because it says, this is what hope looks like. Not the absence of danger. Not the permanent defeat of every force that separates us. Hope looks like the willingness to keep sailing. To keep reaching. To trust that connection is always worth the risk. That's the message Moana 2 sends its audience home with. And in 2024, in the world as it actually is, that message feels not just appropriate but necessary. Who is this film for? The easy answer is, families with children. And yes, absolutely, this is a film children will love. The adventure sequences are thrilling. The humor lands. The characters are vivid and memorable. It hits everything a great family animated film should hit. But I want to push back on the framing of this film as just a children's movie, because I think it undervalues what the film is doing. Moana 2 is a film about the weight of leadership for anyone who has ever led anything. It's a film about the gap between the legend we build around someone and the complicated truth of the actual human being, for anyone who has ever idolized someone and then had to reconcile the idol with the person. It's a film about isolation and connection for anyone who has lived through the last few years of a world that has had to rediscover, painfully, why connection matters. Adults who come to this film expecting 2 hours of pleasant, safe entertainment and leave having felt something they didn't expect to feel. That's the film doing exactly what great animated cinema is supposed to do. Final rating, 8.2 out of 10. Moana 2 is a genuinely great animated film that is not quite as perfect as the best Disney animated films but significantly better than its modest critical reception suggested. It is visually extraordinary. It is emotionally honest. It is culturally specific in a way that enriches rather than limits its universal appeal. It has real flaws, pacing issues in the first act, an underdeveloped villain, a soundtrack that doesn't quite match the heights of the original, but it reaches for something real, and more often than not, it grabs it. It is a worthy sequel to one of Disney's best animated films. It is a film that respects the intelligence of its audience. It is a film that understands that the ocean between people is not an obstacle to be overcome once but a journey to be undertaken again and again, for as long as we want to remain connected to each other. And in the end, that's exactly the kind of film Moana has always been. The kind that reminds you that the call of the horizon is not a threat. It's an invitation. And every time you hear it, you have a choice. You can stay on the shore, or you can sail. Thank you for watching. If this breakdown meant something to you, if it made you see Moana 2 differently, if it made you want to watch it again, drop a comment, let me know your take. What did you think of the sequel? Did the crew dynamic work for you? Did the music hit? Was Maui's arc everything you hoped for? I read everything. Every comment. And this channel only grows because people like you show up and engage honestly with this content. Until next time, I'm your host, and this has been the full breakdown of Moana 2. Keep sailing.
The stars are coming out, Maui.
A good sign. We're on the right path.
There it is. The uncharted island. Those cliffs look treacherous, but I have to see what's there.
The ocean called and we answered! Take our strength with you, Moana.
I carry it in my heart.
The ocean awaits its wayfinder.